Hello, and welcome to The Executive Appeal, a show that convenes the world's most powerful and successful leaders to share mentoring and career advancement advice to help you successfully transition into senior level executive positions. I'm your host, Alex Tremble, award-winning speaker, author, and leadership expert with over a decade of experience coaching and advising some of our nation's most senior level government leaders. So if you're ready to reach your goals, let's get started. So how are you doing today, Alan?
I'm great. Alex, how are you?
Again, I am fantastic now that you and I are on the line. I try to just give a quick introduction of who you are. Do you want to just get maybe a few seconds or a few minutes on, who you are, what you do, or what you did, just for a little context?
I'm Alan Constantian. I was born that way. I still am. What I did was I spent 21 years as an Air Force Medical Service Corps officer. I retired as a full colonel. Then I went to the Centers in Medicare and Medicaid Services. I spent 7 years there, first as a GS-15 and then the last 5 years as an SES. And then I moved to VA because it just killed me to live within walking distance of the metro and yet have to drive 2 hours a day to go to work.
Smart man.
And because it was an opportunity to use my strengths, I thought, even better than I was at CMS at VA. And so I spent the, I would say, final 8 years of my professional career as a executive at the Department of Veterans Affairs, all in the Office of Information and Technology. And I'm back because of COVID for a replay, but in a much more subdued role because, Alex, regardless of what position you have, you're still the same person. And there are other things that I enjoy doing outside of work. And as time draws to a close on the earth, I wanted to enjoy some more of those things. But it's much easier when you're not in a top leadership position to have, I think, a good work-life balance. So here I am.
Well, we appreciate you being here, and I think the country as a whole appreciates you coming out of retirement again to continue serving the country. Especially our veterans. So, when I first mentioned this interview series to you, I told you that we're focused on influence and teaching people how to influence those around them, especially at this executive level. And you and me like, well, yeah, I need to be there. This is what we do. In my division, this is what we do. We influence others. Why are you so interested in the idea of influence, and what made you so good at it?
So I think, and Alex and I are working together on a leadership development program. That's what we've been spending the past 2 months working on. And one of the things that we do is a standout assessment. And my two strengths in that were being a connector and being a stimulator. So basically, through this instrument, my focal areas are to connect with other people in order to, the stimulator role is to understand and empathize with what other people are feeling. And the connector role is to make connections happen, all toward an end of getting things done that help the other person and the organization. And, that's part of public service, the other person writ large. So I was really excited about this because in order to be effective at my job in account management, I had to connect with other people for most of my service with the Veterans Health Administration. And then I would have to I would understand where they're coming from and then stimulate action toward an end that accomplished things. And, sometimes the results could be very, very powerful. And it wasn't because I had a staff of hundreds. It's because I made the connections and had the political savvy to know what are the opportunities to, in many cases, turn some critical opinion maker in VHA from a skeptic of OIT to a supporter of OIT, and then working on those relationships very intentionally and deliberately to turn those folks into sort of net positive agents for us, and systematically, sort of one by one, targeting particular places with focus. I think I was successful, and the success is not my success, but the success was successes in suicide prevention, in telehealth, in the caregiver programs that we're doing, in a variety of community care programs, a variety of things that were really important to the agency. So I wasn't looking to build my own success. I was looking to use my strengths to leverage them and those connections and building up relationship capital with others to accomplish things that were important for veterans.
Well, I think you already touched on a lot of what I wanted to get into. I'm going to keep diving in. If you can think of an instance of someone who you said was maybe a skeptic or critical of a particular idea or program, and then you help to push them over to being a net positive, how did you go about doing that? You don't have to say anyone's name, but how do you go about making the person who's a critic an ally and a proponent?
Well, I think the thing you have to do first is listen to the person, and sort of empathize with where are they coming from, how are they seeing the world, how are they seeing or the organization that you're representing, and then also to understand what is it that they're trying to accomplish. Now, if it's something that they're trying to accomplish, which is like for their own self-aggrandizement, I'd sort of like say, oh, that's interesting, I'd walk away. But if it was something that genuinely was going to benefit veterans, so for example, in the suicide prevention program or in telehealth, and I don't know which one to pick, but maybe if there's time we can do both. But with telehealth, back in 2016, I was interacting with different executives in VA, and really ever since I got to VA under Secretary Shinseki, telehealth as a concept and a vision was something everybody loved. This was the future. We wanted to do this. And when I became the account manager for health, so that was the SES position that was focused on VHA. My final position was over all of the account managers, but I was one of the account managers in 2016. I'd heard this for a couple of years since I started at VA at 2012. So for several years, I'd heard a lot of rhetoric on telehealth. And then, so I approached the director of telehealth. I don't think he'd care if it was a secret or not, Dr. Kevin Galpin, and he said, well, we're having a gathering here in DC in June. And I said, well, that's great. Maybe we could come to the last day and do some sort of strategic planning on terms of, where you are and where you want to get to. And so we did that. We did some studying, and we came to find out that with all the rhetoric, there was absolutely no money put toward development and expansion of telehealth. There were a couple of small-scale projects, but nothing else. So it was a vision without any kind of resources. And so this didn't happen immediately, but over time, and both through working the process, but also through working relationships and exposing the risks, both he and I, in different ways, me more on the OIT side, he more on the VHA side, said, this is an issue that we've got to address. We have way underinvested. There's so much potential here. The rhetoric was all over the place. And so we basically, in 2018 and 2019, started a program to expand telehealth capacity across the board at all 1,000 plus VA points of presence. So it was at least at a satisfactory capacity. And when I came back, I want to tell you, Alex, when I came back, one of my first emails was back to Kevin, and I said, gee, Kevin, I'm sure glad that we got together and collaborated. I don't know how we would have overcome this telehealth work without having, put the time in and invested. And now it's coming to fruition because everybody was using telehealth. I mean, people were still going to the medical centers, but telehealth was widely used. And he said, you should. He completely agreed with me. He said, I don't know what we would have done without the partnership that got the results that we had. So we were ready in 2020 when COVID hit. So that's one example. I have another good example if there's time, but that's one example of collaboration that was very sort of effective and had a very important outcome, because I do not know where we would have been in 2020 had that meeting in 2016 not taken place. And the incremental work, working both relationships and the process to get the attention of leaders who then were able to fund the expansion of telehealth. It was part of our joint business plan in 2019, and systematically we had the money. Things got turned from red to green with respect to telehealth availability.
Well, a few things. One, I love that story. And I think it does highlight the world that we're in now, as well as the world, I think it's how it's always been, but how we're moving forward. We can't wait until we need something to start working on it. You can't wait till you're thirsty to start digging the well. And what you did was you prepared the VA, 2+ years early, so they could deal with this challenge, and because you spent the time, the energy, and the effort. So I want to make sure I'm highlighting that. Well, and to your point, though, I think, how did you decide? I think a lot of people believe that these are my toys. I'm going to play over here. Those are your toys. You play over there. I'm busy. I have my own resources. How to partner, to collaborate with him? It took time. It took effort. It took resources. How did you know this was what a venture worth investing your time and resources? I'm sure you had other things.
Well, I've been involved in healthcare in various aspects for my entire professional career, and so in the military, I was not always an IT person. I was in healthcare operations, working medical supply and resource management and different patient administration activities. So after that amount of time, you kind of have a sense of, especially if you're in the technology area, you kind of have a sense of, this is going to be a game changer. I need to get behind this. And it was sort of clearly signaled by leadership that at least from a policy perspective, leadership was all behind this, but it took getting into the books and seeing, he was expressing frustration, and I was looking at the IT books, and I said, well, the process has never gotten you any money. Here's the amount of money you have in 2017, 18, 19 for development, and they were all goose eggs. And so we changed that because we highlighted, I think, the impact of that lack of investment to leadership, that the process happened, but there were things in the process that were not supporting leadership's vision. Other interests were intervening, and there's always more demand for IT services or really any kind of resource than there is supply. It is a scarcity kind of game. But in this case, there was such a case of efficiency that was possible through a more robust telehealth structure. Being able to backfill a provider that gives their 2 weeks notice in in Fargo, with a provider who's living a great, maybe retired part-time life out of a telehealth center in Charleston. That physician never in a million years could be persuaded to move to Fargo, North Dakota when they're age 65, still willing to practice medicine, see some patients, but not in Grand Forks or not in Fargo. It's cold there in the winter. They want to spend their time in Charleston, South Carolina, or I don't know, San Antonio, Texas. And being able to use through telehealth appropriately to have patients seen who wouldn't be seen at all, or would be sent out to the community, just seemed like it was a no-brainer to move forward on. The value proposition was just too great to not put some effort behind it.
But you and I were talking earlier, again, as we are working on this other training together, the importance of fear. And I don't think we didn't frame it like that, but we were talking about educating people how to give briefings. We have to let people know what the challenge is, right? If there's no challenge, there's no reason for me to listen to you, because there's something wrong. Mm-hmm. It sounds like, you called out earlier that you're good at political savvy. This sounds like that was a great move that you guys did, and it seemed like you very articulately, very methodically laid out the challenge. Hey, if we don't do something bad is going to happen to us.
Yes.
Does that make, yeah.
Oh, yes. And you have to pick your venues carefully, too. So Dr. Galpin, Kevin had put together a great sort of chart showing what the current state of telehealth was to the National Leadership Council for the VHA. And I, as the account manager for health, I was invited to go to those meetings regularly. I was the only non-VHA person in the room. It was a great privilege because you saw the VHA organization having a dialogue in terms of what their priorities were internally, and not speaking to an IT audience, but speaking amongst themselves. So that provided such great insight, and I credit both Dr. Shulkin and Dr. Stone for opening that venue up to us, or to me. So he had this great presentation, and I said, Kevin, we've got to show this. At that point we had monthly meetings with the CIO and the Undersecretary for Health, and I said, we got to show this at a joint meeting, because the visual of having all of these places that were not able to sufficiently support telehealth sessions was just compelling. So that was just one opportunity to show visually what the challenge was, all this red marks, and then to periodically, after we had found ways to invest in the improvements, to periodically come back, every 6 months or so, and say, here was the last time we showed you this slide, this is what it looked like. 6 months later, this is what it looks like now. This is what, with the current investment, this is what we hope it will look like 6 months from now. And we put it in a joint business plan that was signed by both the CIO and the Undersecretary of Health, that we are going to get to, 74% of these places are going to have at least adequate telehealth coverage by the end of fiscal year 2019. We hit that target. And then I left, because then I was, so I kind of wrapped up my services. I was kind of dual-hatted as the account manager for health and the account manager for the entire office for most of 2019, which is maybe why I retired, because it was just two big jobs like that was too much. I needed a break. So anyway, so visually displaying the challenge and and the results of their investment was very powerful. And having a graphic or being able to quantify things or show things graphically is very powerful when you're trying to persuade people and keep them on the course.
Well, and I would add, it's also how intentional you were about making it not an OIT thing. It wasn't you approaching this as, hey, this is us. These are two very
Yes.
important factors of this organization, and we think this is really essential. So that very intentional, again, not making it about you, but I love how you did that. And when you talk about your strengths, and you talked about communication, being able to show the data, show what's important using different types of avenues, right? You know, there's people who need the data. So some people need this the pictures to visualize it. Some people need to understand the qualitative impact that's going to happen, or qualitative impact is going to happen. I think we as leaders, and correct me, especially people who become successful, they become successful because they're really good at something, and they tend to see the world through that angle of what they're really good at. Like me, my thing is political savvy. My thing is communication, influence. And so I generally believe that I can convince most people to do the right thing. And so I look at every problem like that, whereas other people look at the same exact situation and say, no, this has nothing to do with influence. This has to do with X, Y, and Z instead. So how do you, and I assume that you've thought about this, but how do you also account for the different types of styles when you're trying to influence those people? You may have a particular way of doing things or looking at things. How do you make sure that you're not only paying attention to a problem the way that you see it?
Well, I think you have to know what your strengths are and what they're not. And so, so there's two ways of approaching that. If it's a really important problem, but you're not the person that can solve this, you bring in the right people who can solve it. Or in the resource constrained world that we live in, which is like governed by the sun and the hours on the clock, you pick things. So most people have especially the higher you are in leadership, the more choices you have with how you allocate your time and your emphasis. And you can't allocate your time and emphasis to every worthy problem. So your choices are either try to get somebody else who can address that problem, whose capabilities are well suited to addressing that problem. That's one approach. And another approach, and they're not exclusive approaches, is to tackle those problems that that you have the gifts to be able to solve. And so with the suicide prevention work and with the telehealth work, those were things that I knew that I could make a difference with the limited time, discretionary time that I had, because we all have to do performance reports, evaluations, our schedules are crowded with meetings. So when it comes down to how much discretionary time you have to focus on particular things and go after them, it comes out to be not that much time that you have. And I think it gets less the higher you go. You have more leverage, but you have even less time.
Like that.
And so you have to choose your battles in terms of battles that you think you can win with the time that you have available. So it's a resource allocation question.
I love that. I haven't heard anyone say that as of yet, but I love it. The more senior you become, the more you have leverage, the less time you have. And so to be very intentional with where you allocate your most powerful, most important resource, which is your time.
Right. The less discretionary time you have. We all have the same amount of time, but it's if your time from which is where it was getting for me, was from 8 till 5 was, if I had a half an hour with not a meeting scheduled in there, and most of those were not meetings that I scheduled. The ones that I scheduled were meetings that I thought you had to have as a supervisor, which is, if somebody's going to be working for you, you ought to be able to, find 30 minutes every couple of weeks to be able to check in with them one-on-one, to give them some feedback, give them, unfettered access to you. And so yes, I imposed those meetings on myself, but those were necessary. But most of the meetings were meetings that were placed on my schedule because of my position. And so the amount of discretionary time I had was very limited, and often evenings and weekends.
So, I talked to other senior level leaders, and some of them want to have a pet project, something that's important to them, but they feel like they don't have the discretionary time. All their time is filled by the responsibilities, the mandatory responsibilities of that position. Do you have any advice for other senior leaders who have an idea like you were able to work on, right? That you knew this is going to be huge in the next few years, but they feel like they don't have enough time. Like, how would you? What advice would you have for senior leaders who feel like they're in that situation?
I would say often there are things that you can delegate safely to others, and part of your responsibilities of leadership is to get things and sort of step away and sort of train the other people to pick up. And I think so just as much as you need to look at what are the opportunities and how do I want to spend my discretionary time, you also have to be very aggressive about, I want to give other people an opportunity to do things and feel like they own something, that this is my thing to own. Because, everybody wants to own something. They just don't want to do little piecework. And, people want to, create the, I don't know. People want to, I'll use a tailoring example. People want to create the whole dress, or they want to, for a cook, would want to cook the whole cake. They don't just want to beat the eggs. They want to, they want to be the owner of something that they can be proud of. And so, one way of doing that is sort of, you have to do what you have to do when you first come into a job, but once you've mastered that and you've understood it, one of the opportunities you get to make some discretionary time is to then take members of your staff who have promise and are the right fit for that particular challenge and bring them into it. Not just, okay, this is yours now, see ya, but gradually bring them in, establish the relationships that you have with the people, and then slowly fade out. And there was one person at GS14 who took the entire access issue, which was so big, scheduling and access, and it consumed my time and one of my deputies' times, a lot. But over a couple of years, we'd kind of had it under control, and we took a new employee and said, "This is going to be yours." And over the period of about 3 or 4 months, they got involved. We introduced them to folks. They were at the meetings. They ran the meetings. We were still there. And then we gradually drifted away. And then nobody noticed, which was good because, he was able to handle it. And he felt so empowered by having that as, this is his work. But it also gave me time then to focus on things that needed my help to push along, which, for a while we're scheduling, but then scheduling was on track. And then I handed that off to another capable GS14 who went in places where I couldn't go because of his technical expertise and solved some very great, excellent, specific problems that made a difference to people in, for example, in a veterans home in North Dakota. I never would have been able to solve that problem. With his technical expertise and that area of focus, he was able to solve that. And by that time, the funding was rolling in, and I had to take care of making sure that the sponsorship kept coming for enhancing the capability across the medical centers. But so I think there's an initial effort that's required that is a heavy lift. But if you're always looking at opportunities to develop your people by giving them something of substance that you've kind of, gotten to a steady state point, and pass that along, you can create time, discretionary time for yourself. It's still there's always gonna be things that crowd out the time, but but you have to be, just as much as you want to go after certain things, you have to be equally aggressive in terms of letting things go, where it's time for you to let things go and let others sort of take it in places that you can't take it, because maybe your skills are maybe new issues have arisen where your strengths are not the best strengths to use for that area. So like when it came to solving a technical issue for a telehealth situation, my skills were not capable of that. My skills were, this is a big problem. We don't have any money. Let's find the venues to bring it in front of people and get the money. That was my skill. And once we had the money and there were some specific technical issues to be resolved, it was good that I was not there. And, one of my colleagues, a subordinate in my organization, took over because he was able to solve those problems that I would not have been able to solve and get the satisfaction of having accomplished it.
I have to just key in on that word you used. You said aggressively. I love that word because it's not like, oh, well, I'll find time sometime when it happens. I'll look at my, schedule every once in a while as my workload. And no, you're saying be very intentional about making sure you're removing things off of your plate that shouldn't be on your plate, and you're empowering others to overcome, to take on those tasks, and allowing them, like you said, to make it theirs. Don't just crack the egg, but you're actually making this cake. I love the word that you use, aggressive, because it seems so intentional and to make sure it happens.
Right. I mean, and from both perspectives. One, it's a win-win because you get time to apply to other emerging challenges that are coming up that really you in your leadership capacity, you have to handle some of the fastballs that come in. It would be wrong to like duck the fastball and have it hit one of your subordinates in the head. You mean that they're paying you to catch the fastballs. But when things are sort of in a sort of controlled state and the direction is clear, but still not completely clear, there's still challenges. It's your obligation to hand that off to somebody else, because not only it saves you time so you can handle the fastballs, the new fastballs that are coming, but it also gives them opportunities to handle important things, not just make work projects, but important things to the organization that have some success, but they still they're not concluded, and they have opportunities to build upon whatever foundation you may have laid and solve problems in different ways. And that's part of the satisfaction of being a leader, is that by doing this, then you develop the next generation of leaders who are able to handle the fastballs, as opposed to, well, all I do is I don't know, I beat the eggs. That's all I know how to do is beat the eggs. I don't know how to make a cake. Well, okay, so this cake is half baked. It's got all the ingredients in it. Now bake the cake.
Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, you now literally just took me to where I wanted to go next, is developing that pipeline, those leaders beneath you. Again, what the two things that you talked about, you were really good as is those relationships and the political savvy. How did you go about teaching you get your 14s and 15s under you. How did you go about teaching them how to be more politically savvy? and have strategic relationships. And if I can say one thing, I was talking to a leader, another SES leader at an agency, right at the beginning of the COVID crisis, and he was getting advice from the politicals. Don't say anything about Corona. Don't say anything about it. We're just acting like it's not happening. Um, and they said you can't have any meetings on it either. But if someone needs to, not work from the office, they can work from home. But you can't have any meetings. You can't communicate about it, like mass communication. And so he's like, okay. So he goes to his 14s and 15s and says, okay, look, this is the situation. We cannot do any mass communication. And then they said, okay, well, what if our employees want to work from home? Well, then you handle that on a case-by-case basis. But what should we say? You should handle that on a case-by-case basis. And he was trying to communicate, like, you make the decision. I can't tell you this. But he's like, they just didn't have that political awareness to understand what could be said and what couldn't be said in order to do that. So how do you teach those things?
Well, I think, in the one-on-one meetings that I scheduled, and, those are important meetings to me for two reasons. One, because sometimes, it's hard to get the attention of, a boss that's busy in a senior role. So you want to make yourself available, but also, an email is not good. I didn't consider an email the best means of communicating sort of these sort of soft skills of, okay, so to go over why we were in the future going to take a particular action, or what had happened in the past recently, and why it was done that way, so they can see, like, this was effective, but it was effective because of, sort of these things fell into place, to sort of connect the dots in terms of it just didn't happen. This is why it happened, and to take the time to sort of to describe what the process was to make those things happen. Often it involved sort of political sort of savvy, and then taking people with me to meetings. Like if there was going to be a meeting with somebody where we're going to try to overcome a particular issue, sometimes I would take people who, they knew the details and they were going to do the briefing, and I was just going to be there as the senior person. But sometimes it was, look, I just want you to watch. I just want you to observe and get to know what kinds of questions this critical person has. Because this was maybe somebody who was, one of the people who we were trying to, it sounds like a spy effort. We're trying to bring them over or something, but no, we're trying. But in a sense, we were targeting people to get them to be net promoters of IT through our actions, not because we, not because we could blackmail them or, I've got this on you. You better say good things about OIT. It was by demonstrating what good partners OIT could be for them, and sort of winning them over, positively. So sometimes I would just bring people in, and then afterwards, we would sort of on the way either there or in the back. It doesn't have to be formal. It can be just sort of as opportunities where I say, we did this because I had to do this because of this, these reasons, and to sort of share some of that sort of learned over years skills.
No, you know what? I feel like you and my first executive mentor would like get along so well. When I was just beginning my career in the government, I was a GS, I think a 7 at that point, and I oversaw. Well, initially I was GS4, but when I really started cranking, I was GS7, overseeing executive leadership development. Made no sense, right? Why are they gonna let some GS4 do it? But GS4, GS7, that's the role I had. And so what he did was he intentionally brought me to every SCS meeting he could bring me to. Let
Very
me
helpful.
just listen. Like, I wasn't doing anything but listening. And then he would bring me back to the office, and we would sit down and have that informal conversation about,
Right.
yes, what was decided, but how did we get there? Oh,
Right.
this person doesn't like this person. This person didn't support this.
Yeah.
That's why they're supporting. Like, and those things that we need to make sure we're teaching our those upcoming leaders. But I feel like maybe people don't feel like there's enough time to do that, but it's so essential. You know, Alan, you've talked a lot about the relationship building throughout this our time together. And as we start getting ready to wrap up, I want to maybe post how should people be focused on building relationships? You talked about being strategic. What can you talk a little more about that?
Well, I think one needs to be deliberate in terms of forming relationships or professional relationships that I'm talking about. Maybe personal relationships too, but from a professional perspective, your goal is to help support the mission of your organization. That's what you're getting paid to do. And so you want to be as effective as possible in doing that role. And so we're careful about paying attention and inventorying what we need with respect to many things. Like, we don't have any cheese in the refrigerator. We're short on cheese. We need to have cheese. Or there's no cereal so we fill out what our sort of critical missing elements are every week or two, and then we go to the grocery store and supply those for ourselves. Well, what I'm arguing is that in terms of being politically savvy with respect to relationships, is that we also need to inventory what we have in terms of relationships, both the quality of the relationships we have, but also the redundancy and the gaps of our relationships, and seek deliberately and thoughtfully to not worry so much about the redundancies. That's fine, but maybe not invest in all of the redundancies with the same amount of vigor. Pick out one or two in that area that all have the same information, but to deliberately go and seek out places where there are gaps, because it's really the value you bring to your organization is when you're the only one who has the box of cereal. Everybody else may have chicken in their refrigerator, and we can all say, oh, well, I'll share my chicken with you. Great, yeah, I already have chicken. And I could get it from Jeanette or Dewan or somebody else. I could get the chicken from. What I don't have is rice, and none of you have rice either, so I'm going to go out and look for rice. So similarly, in our relationships, if we are immersed in our own little bubble where the only information we get is this echo chamber of other things that same bubble knows, the value added I have from a relationship network is not much if those are all my relationships. The value you get is when you can form relationships, not just go to a conference and randomly meet people, although that in itself has value, but to form relationships and ongoing relationships with people with whom other folks with whom you normally mingle do not have those similar relationships, because then you bring additional insights and perspectives. Like my friends and colleagues in Social Security Administration when I was at CMS. And these can be drawn from any number of sources. Maybe you speak French and you do a meetup group in, talking French, and you happen to meet somebody who is kind of in your same area, same area of work. So based on that common interest, you develop a friendship or relationship where you are able to pass information back and forth that's of interest and of value to both of you professionally. So that's kind of what I was alluding to.
You shared an example before, not during this interview today, but about there's two organizations. There's your organization and another organization where no one talked at all except for you and a particular individual. Can you share that example? I thought it was really great.
Right. That was Social Security Administration and Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services in Baltimore, where I worked for 7 years. And there had been relationships, but some of the people in both organizations who had that relationship either retired or moved on somehow. And some of the people who came in didn't seek to establish those relationships, or there were some initial encounters that sort of made those relationships sort of go sour and dark. And so the easiest thing to do when a relationship is fraught with tension is to ignore it completely. Just sort of turn your back on it, pretend it'll go away. Maybe it'll get better with time. And so the problem was that there was nobody else that was talking sort of frankly with that formally in other groups, but not sort of frankly saying, hey, this is what we're really thinking in here, and vice versa. And it didn't last long because eventually the other folks realized that we can't just have two IT people as the only people talking to each other. I mean, we were executives, but we were junior senior executives. We weren't the top tier. But for a time, it really bridged a few things that could have blown up significantly, because we were able to, in a sort of within our own circles, sort of pass the perspectives of the others, which were often not as sort of poisoned as one might think in one's own organization. So if you don't have contact with another group or organization, it's really easy to ascribe the worst of motives and intentions to them in your little vacuum. But since we were having this dialogue across organizations, I could say, well, you may think that that's why they're behaving this way, but what my friend over there says is they're behaving this way because of this, and it's not because they want to give you an eye poke or anything else you're inventing in your mind. It's because of these certain things that are affecting them directly that have nothing to do with you. And so that kind of cooled down the temperature a bit until they could get together, and they'd sort of decided that they had to work together nicely, play nicely in the playground.
And it made me feel like, as you were sharing that story, I think it underscores the point you were saying before about how much of an asset you were, because you had a relationship that communicate information back and forth that no one else had. You had once shared an example of, being on LinkedIn.com where, you see someone on LinkedIn.com and there's, 50, 15, 30, 40 people connected with that person in your organization. Well, is there value add in making that connection as well, or finding someone who's not connected to the organization? Maybe you need to have that relationship. It actually makes me think of a time with someone. Generally speaking, when I work with senior leaders, I do my best to, if they don't like someone, I'm very intentional at building a relationship with them and or their office, just to make sure that if these two can't talk at this level, I can still get information to my supervisors, my team, to make sure they're successful. And obviously, you be really careful because you don't want to be seen as a spy or something. But again, like you said, I had access to information that other people didn't have, which made me more valuable.
So you're creating a unique connection and a unique link in the network, which in your absence would not be there. And so the information is richer.
Yeah, I love that you brought that concept up, because I think so many people, I think for people it's really easy to, like you said before, to hang out, to associate with people who are like you, and it's so easy, kind of just drawn into it instead of saying, okay, whoa, I know I have a lot of people in this realm. Great. But where if I built a relationship would it actually add value to the organization, to myself, that many people don't have. So again, I become more of an asset. I just love that concept that you brought up.
Mhm. And I think it's win-win. It's the person, because you are probably also uniquely connected. You're the only one in the other person's network that has these connections. So you're bringing your entire network that with a thin string to somebody else's network, which would not exist before otherwise. So
Well,
yeah, I think it's very valuable, and I think that people are not, in general, are not as um, intentional, I don't know, deliberate about curating their networks um, as they maybe should. I mean, it's pleasant to talk to people, all of whom have your same ideas, maybe, but you don't really learn or grow from those kind of things. So if, and you know, work work it's great when work can be fun and enjoyable, but as I said often to my staff, is like there's a continuum between, there's this kind of this two-dimensional array in terms of an organization being either ineffective or effective. So that's on one, that's not one dimension, and the other one is being um, enjoyable or not enjoyable. So in a working situation, hanging out and talking exclusively to people who are thinking the same thoughts as you are may be enjoyable, but it's not productive. If I want to do that, I'll go to the beach and share a beach house with my friends. But that's not work. Nobody's paying me to do that.
mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Um, what I want to do is do something enjoyable, and making connections with people who have different perspectives is, you know, if you have any level of intellectual curiosity, is interesting. You may not agree with them, but it's really interesting. And you can find these connections in lots of random ways. I mean, there are lots of opportunities to do that in you know, going to striking up conversations. You have to be a little bit outgoing. You can't just, you know, only talk to people that you already know. You have to sort of reach out and say hello and force yourself to do that if you're an introvert, which I am. I tend to be. But ultimately, a lot of good can come out of it. So, you know, that's what I've tried to do. And that's, we're talking about being politically savvy. And I've tried to do that over the course of my career, is to talk to people who are not like me. Maybe in the Air Force, I might talk to a pilot or even a nurse, or you know, not some bunch of health service administrators. You know, what's it like from their perspective? How are they seeing things? And it's usually a win-win.
Well, Alan, I appreciate your time so much today. You provided so much great substantive advice for everyone to consider and hopefully implement into their lives as they move forward. Um, Alan, what I'm going to do is I'm going to give you the last word in regards to, is there any last thoughts or ideas you want to get off your chest that you want to share with someone who is a 14, 15, wanting to be an executive? What would you share with them if you had any last words?
Well, I think you can do lots of things as an executive. You know, there's a lot of perks, but there's also lots of demands as an executive, and being able to keep a work-life balance is important. One's sole objective in life should not be um, to reach the top rung of an organization if that's going to destroy other non-professional objectives. There's a lot of life to be enjoyed that has nothing to do with work, and one has to think deliberately and carefully about what is that next job going to demand from me, and do I want to give that? I think
Well,
that's what I would offer.
well, again, I'm actually fairly sure that anyone who's watching this interview right now is probably a go-getter, and they probably needed to hear exactly what you shared right now. Thank you so much for joining us here today. Hey, everyone, if you enjoyed this talk, this interview, please, wherever you are, click the like button, click the subscribe button, share this content with your friends and family so they have the opportunity to also learn this valuable information that was shared today. If you, again, I'm not going to put Alan out there, but I think he's probably on social media. You can find him if he wants to be found. If he wants to be found, I'll put his contact information in the description.
Yeah, my LinkedIn there's not that many Constantians, so you find.
Well, as I like to end every session I do, please, everyone, especially right now during COVID, stay safe, but also stay strong, stay positive, and definitely stay moving. Thank you. Thanks for listening to The Executive Appeal with Alex Tremble. I invite you to follow The Executive Appeal wherever you listen to podcasts. Follow me, your host, Alex Tremble, across all socials or via email for exclusive webinars, courses, and speaking engagements on continued topics of executive leadership. So until next time, stay strong, stay positive, and definitely stay moving.